Lewis Carswell.
It's an honour to follow the new Member of Parliament for Eastbourne. I remember indeed sharing a platform coming to campaign for her in her constituency about a year ago. She was clearly a worthy winner then, and she's a winner now, and I'm delighted to see her here. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I may be my party's only voice in the House of Commons, but I shall speak on behalf not only of my constituents, but on behalf of those millions who voted for my party. I may be only one vote in the division lobbies, but I shall use it to support ministers when they do sensible things, to oppose the government when they're being daft, and when I think it's possible to improve things, to try to amend things to make them better. There is, in short, much in the Queen's speech with which I agree. Now, this is ostensibly a debate about health and social care, and I will direct most of my comments to that, but I think it would be remiss of me if I didn't touch on one subject that I think is central to the long-term health and well-being of our nation in its broader sense, and that is the Europe question. And I'm absolutely thrilled and delighted that there is an EU referendum bill in the Queen's speech. It's truly magnificent. I remember how in October 2011, alongside 111 honourable friends from all sides of the House, we voted for an in-out referendum bill. We were opposed on that occasion by both front benches, by all the whips, and indeed by many of the pet pundits. It's wonderful that the front benches, including the Labour front bench, have changed their minds and have converted to the case for a referendum. I think we should be very generous to ministers as they bring this bill before the House. This is not a time for bickering or semantics. The government, I think, has got it right on the big issues in this bill. I think they're right about the franchise. I think they're more or less right about the wording. And I think even on the timing, they're right too. The campaign to leave the European Union begins with this bill, and we're only going to win it if we are relentlessly upbeat, optimistic and generous. And I think we should begin today by being generous to the government.
Does he agree, therefore, that the worst possible scenario would have been that policy articulated by Ukip to hold a referendum now without any reform of the European Union, when all the polls suggested that actually the answer would be to stay in an unreformed EU? Wouldn't that have been the worst possible scenario which his party was advocating?
My friend is being generous in his responses too. That I think is being a little bit unfair. It was the position of my party to get the legislation on the statute book. I think those of us who want to maximise the chances of the out campaign winning recognise that actually it is quite helpful if the Prime Minister was to try to negotiate a new deal and to be seen widely to fail to bring back anything significantly different. If the Prime Minister wants to take his time to conjure up this fictitious new deal, then let him do so. The more that he's seen as being Harold Wilson Mark II, the greater the chances of the undecideds going into the no column. But I think that during the referendum debate that's going to follow, we need to be generous too to those who will be pro-Brussels, as perhaps my honourable friend may be. We must seek to convince them that Brussels is not a seat of high-minded internationalism, but it is instead a nexus of vested interests, a den of crony capitalism. I hope to support too the Education and Adoption Bill. I think there is something fundamentally wrong. Well, that's overstating it. I think there is something wrong with some of the adoption process in this country, and I hope that we use this bill as a chance to look at what other countries do when it comes to adoption, particularly Scandinavian countries and Denmark. I want to support the childcare bill and will study the small print. The issue of affordable childcare is a very important one in my constituency. I look with interest at the detail of the housing bill too. The idea of supporting self-build I think is a very good one, as indeed is the idea of a brownfield register. Now, the Health Minister outlined ideas to change and improve our National Health Service. He outlined the importance of putting more money into healthcare. Given the advances in medical technology and the ageing population and rising expectations, my party supports that. As nations become richer, it is natural that we should want to spend more on health. The Minister seems to be talking about championing the patient as opposed to the producer interest. He seems to be talking about 7-day surgeries, using innovation to allow people to access better care. And my instinct is very much to support this agenda. Mr. Speaker, the Health Minister also touched on the challenges that we face as a country when it comes to healthcare. The challenge of coping with dementia and social care, the need to do more for mental health care. There is clearly a shortage of GPs. There are clearly problems at A&E departments. Ambulance response times are not good enough. There does need to be a culture change in the health service. These challenges and problems are very real, and they're certainly real at Colchester Hospital, which serves many of my constituents, as I know members on both sides will recognise. But I don't think we should forget that we are living in an age of unprecedented progress. We have 1 million more people over the age of 70 at the end of this Parliament because we're living longer, healthier lives. Excessive alcohol consumption, particularly amongst younger people, is falling. Cigarette-related deaths are falling. E-cigarettes are coming along and providing a very modern, cheap solution to the age-old tobacco problem. Diseases that were once terminal are in retreat. A whole new generation of tailor-made drugs is on the horizon. The public policy choices that any minister will have to grapple with are difficult, yet their choices born of rising expectations, greater medical capability and greater scrutiny. There is much that this government does that I imagine I'm going to be opposing. I regret what is not in the Queen's speech as much as what I support what is in it. There is a failure to introduce meaningful political reform. There is nothing in it that will make government more properly accountable to Parliament and Parliament more properly answerable to the people. There is little in it to disperse power outward and downward. There is little in it to personalise public services in the way that I think they need to be. But when I do challenge the shortcomings of the government, I will do so cheerfully, and I will do so in the belief that, yes, things aren't good enough, but that's because they could and they should be better. I will be optimistic and cheerful in opposing the government when I need to, and I will support you when I think you're doing the right thing.